Hey, Parker Hill, so good to be here with you. My name is Paul McGinnis, one of the pastors here, and excited to be a part of the next episode in this series. Since the start of this year, we have been rethinking my life, and we've been exploring kind of who we are and where we are, and as we look forward, trying to figure out what that best path looks like for us. And so far, in case you've missed it, we've been reminded that change is possible. Right? Tomorrow does not have to be a repeat of yesterday. Change is possible. There is hope, but it's not going to be easy. Right? That change is going to be thwarted. That change is going to be oppressed because there are evil forces. There are spiritual powers at work against us. But don't lose hope. What we talked about last week was so encouraging. Even though we have these desires within us, we have a great Savior that's come to rescue us, come to lead us through that, and He can help us to reframe those desires and retrain our habits. And so if you've missed any of that so far, you owe it to yourself to check out some of those messages so far in this series. But what I want to do today, I want to point you toward a greenhouse for your own growth. I want to pour some miracle grow on your intentions and on your hopes and on your dreams. I want to help you accelerate that progress that you want to see in your own life. Because I believe it is possible, and I want what God has for you. I want God's best for you. But before we get there, I want to just share something that I've recently discovered about language. Think about this. The more important a concept is to us, the more words we will have to describe it. Let me say that again. The more important a concept is to us, the more words we will have to describe it. Take, for instance, the word car. In some cultures, that's all they would use for anything, motorized that's on wheels. They would just call it a car. No, not here in the U.S. We have our compacts and our subcompacts. We have our economy cars and our sedans, our wagons and our coupes. We have our minivans and our crossovers, our SUVs and our hybrids. And that's not even scratching the surface if you get into more of the sports cars and the high-end stuff. We have all these words because our automobiles are important to us. Think about the word rice. We just have that one word, rice. And yet many Asian cultures, they have separate words, right? If it's out in the field, they call it paddy. If it's bagged, they call it beras. If it's on your plate, they call it nasi. They have separate words for each of the different stages that rice goes through. Or think about pig, right? Cultures that don't eat pig, they just need that one word. Not us. We need pork, bacon, ham, sausage, need I say barbecue, links, patties. We have all these words because it's important to us. I'll give you just one more example, and I won't go into detail, but do you know that in German, they have 30 words that surround the word kiss? They have 30 different words to describe kiss. You might have thought that Italian is the language of love, but those Germans have something going for them there. The more important a word is, the more important a concept is, the more words we will have to describe it. Now, let me just apply that to the concept we want to look at today. In many Eastern cultures, they do not even have a word for privacy or independence or you kind of in isolation. It's not even an important concept. In fact, in Indonesia, certainly your bedroom would kind of be off limits. That would be just for family. But literally, the rest of your house is fair game. The rest of your house, people can come and go however, whenever they like. And it's not uncommon at all for your courtyard and your kitchen and your living space to have strangers, neighbors, anyone, just in and out at all times of the day and night. Think of it more like the common area in a dorm, right? That's how they think of their bedrooms, their houses rather. There's not even a word for privacy. In fact, I heard a story about an Indonesian family who owns 3 miles of beachfront property. Another family owns another several miles right next to them. When those two families decided where to build their houses, do you want to guess where they built them? Exactly on the property line. You can literally reach out the window of one house and touch the other house. Because if they had built them farther apart, they said they would have been lonely. They have all these miles of beachfront property, and yet they wanted to build right next to each other. Because togetherness and community, those are the important concepts in that culture. Now contrast that with we here in America, with our English language. I looked up how many synonyms I could find for the word independent. 25 synonyms for the word independent. Words like self-sufficient, self-supporting, self-sustaining, self-standing, self-reliant, self-contained, self-made. We highly value independence. Now, I'm not necessarily saying one culture is right and one is wrong. They each have some pros and cons, but I want you to see where our value lies. We value privacy, we value independence, and we value bacon and cars as well. But I wonder if those values are keeping us from God's best for us. I wonder if those values are keeping us from experiencing the change that Jesus has in store for us. Could it be that our independence is leading us toward isolation, especially in moments like this where we are now physically distant from each other quite often? And you add to that our love for independence and our natural isolation, could we be losing out on what God has in store for us? Friends, it doesn't have to be this way. We don't have to live isolated. We don't have to live apart from each other. Yes, we do need to continue to be physically distant. But I've said from the very beginning that we do not need to be spiritually distant. We do not need to be socially or relationally distant. God is not quarantined. God continues to invite us into a relationship with him, and he continues to invite us into a relationship with each other. And that is exactly what Jesus came to offer, and he showed us how to find true life change through the path of community. Jesus really is remarkable, isn't he? That goes without being said. And yet, as I think about some more of his character, about some more of who he was, I've come to discover that there's one aspect in particular about Jesus' life that I think is overlooked. In fact, it may very well be his greatest miracle. Think about this. Here we have a grown man in his 30s with 12 best friends. I mean, who can pull that off these days? Only Jesus. And he didn't even cheat, did he? Right? It wasn't like his best friends were just the husbands of his wife's best friends, right? He couldn't even do that. Most of us guys, we're content if we can just grunt our way through a conversation with our wives, friends, husbands. But no, Jesus didn't do that. Jesus had these 12 friends, and he really seemed to like hanging out with them. They'd go fishing all the time. Now and then he'd do some magic tricks for them. It was great. Obviously, I'm finding a little humor in Jesus' connections and certainly in his miracles. I know they weren't magic tricks. The eyewitness accounts point to the fact that these were miracles. These were signs that he truly was who he said he was. He was the one and only Son of God, come on a rescue mission, here to reunite us to God and to reunite us into relationship with each other, moving us out of independence and toward community. And in one of his last conversations with those 12 best friends, he said this, John chapter 13, verse 34. He said, "A new command I give you." Now, these were Jewish boys. They knew a thing or two about commands. They had grown up learning commands. They not only knew the top 10 commands, they knew all the hundreds of commands that were layered beneath that. These guys knew a thing about commands. And yet Jesus is saying something different. I'm not just bringing up the old commands. I'm giving you a new command. I'm giving you a command that is now going to actually supersede and overshadow all those other commands. I'm giving you one overarching command, and he says this, "A new command I give you, love one another." Don't just tolerate one another. Don't just keep your distance from one another. Don't just avoid one another or acknowledge one another. Don't simply put up with one another. Don't just get along with one another. He goes to the next level, to something we need to initiate, to something where we need to be intentional, to something that might even be uncomfortable and sacrificial. He says, love, truly love one another. Not just love God, but love each other, love those people on this horizontal plane. And as if that's not enough, Jesus isn't done. "A new command I give you, love one another as I have loved you, so you must love one another." It's as if Jesus is saying, guys, come here. Think about the way I've treated you over the last 3 years. Think about the way that I've shared my heart with you. Think about the way that I've pursued you. Think about the way that I've treated you when you've messed up. Think about the way that I've treated you, even though I know how you're about to mess up. Think about what I've done for you and how I've opened up my thoughts and my intentions and my hopes and my dreams, how I've shared that together with you. As I have loved you, that's how I want you to love each other. And then, as if he couldn't layer it even deeper, he's still not done. He drives the point home with this final statement: a new command I give to you, love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this kind of love, by that kind of connection, by that relationship that you have in and among each other, by this, everyone will know that you are my disciples if you love one another. Listen, guys, it's your love that's going to set you apart. It's your love that's going to let the rest of the world know that you're my followers, that you're my people. It's not how hard you work. It's not how many rules you keep. It's not how you vote that's going to set you apart. It's not your t-shirts or your memes that are going to let the world know. It's not how angry or loud you are that's going to set you apart as Christ followers. It's how you love one another. The world will know that you are my disciples if and when you love one another. Jesus is introducing something brand new here, a brand new kind of love. A love that breaks barriers, a love that goes beyond borders. And he's giving a new priority to this horizontal, to this interpersonal, relational dimension. Right? We spend so much time, rightfully so, focusing on our love for God. Our love for God with our whole heart and soul and mind and strength. And Jesus says, yes, that's good. But the way that you demonstrate that love is by loving each other. The way that you deepen that love is by loving each other. It's what happens here on this horizontal plane that has implications for the vertical plane. This is the greenhouse for your personal growth and your spiritual transformation. It's your connection with each other. Listen, I'll put it in one sentence for you. If you don't remember anything else, remember this: real connections lead to real change. Real connections lead to real change. If you want that real change, if you want that transformation, it's not going to come in isolation. It comes when we connect our lives to others. That's when we find real change. When we truly, deeply, and honestly connect with each other, we start to change. The person on the other side of that love connection starts to change, and then the impression that we give to the watching world, that starts to change. Real connections lead to real change. And that's exactly what happened in the first century, isn't it? Those 12 guys, plus the women and the others that were surrounding Jesus, they actually put that into practice. They did it. And love was really just their umbrella. Love was the first domino. They would love one another, but then they went well beyond that, right? They then encouraged one another. They were devoted to one another. They honored one another. They carried one another's burdens. They cared for one another. They lived in harmony with one another. They confessed their sin to one another. They prayed for one another. They served one another. They bore one another's burdens. They took that word love and then they found 35 other expressions of it. And if you look throughout the New Testament, you'll see those one another's popping up all over the place as demonstrations of their love for each other. And that's what changed them, and that's what changed their world. Their love was the umbrella over all of those other one another's. That is what Jesus wants us to experience. That, my friends, is how Jesus wants us to live. Real connections leading to real change. But how do we get there? How do we move beyond that isolation and our 25 different words for it into community? How do we get into those kinds of relationships and those kinds of connections? I'll tell you this, it won't come overnight. You can't just download it. It's not on demand. It's not immediate. It's going to take some work, but it is so worth it. And I can't answer all the ins and outs about how you can experience that kind of community and that kind of change, but I can at least point you in the right direction. I can give you a few simple steps that you can take, and the first one is one that I guarantee you've been waiting to hear. You ready? The first step that you need to take, and this is what we've all been waiting for: take off the mask. Haven't you been waiting to hear that? I mean, seriously, let's be honest. We've all been waiting to hear that. But unfortunately, I'm not talking about the face mask. At least for now, that still seems to be the best way that we can love our neighbors and care for each other. So we'll keep the face mask on. I'm talking about a different kind of mask. But no, I'm not talking about the Halloween mask either. Boy, I could tell you about some Halloween masks. Have you seen the stuff that my wife cooks up every October? I mean, some of the things that she thinks up for our family are just epic. I want you to check out some of the highlights from some recent McGinnis Halloween celebrations. Check these out. Oh man, I love those. Those are epic. I love the memories that we're able to make each year with our kids. And it reminds me of just how easy it is for us to put on a costume, for us to put on a mask, for us to play another role. And if I'm honest, I don't just do that on October 31st. That's not the only time I put on a mask. That's not the only time I play another role. That's not the only time I hide behind another persona. It's all too easy to put that mask on, to hide the shame, to live in denial, to be unwilling to admit the pride. And so I put on the mask. And I wonder if you do too. I wonder if in our search for independence and in our search to look strong and like we have it all together, we hide who we really are and what we really are and what's really going on beneath the surface. And when we do that, we don't find community. We don't truly love one another. We're not really bearing each other's burdens. We're not truly caring for each other and letting others care for us. We're not living into that life that Jesus calls us to. This past Christmas, I learned this whole lesson firsthand, right? Literally, like the week leading up to Christmas, things were just falling apart. And I was just feeling overwhelmed by so much of it. I was feeling like a failure in just about every role, right? As a husband, as a father, as a pastor, as a teacher, as a friend, as a brother. Just probably feeling more shame than necessary, but definitely failing on several counts. And then add to all that, as if this isn't often the case, then something else breaks. And you know how there's that one thing, the straw that breaks the camel's back. For me, that's anything mechanical or anything related to home improvements, right? If you know anything about me, you know that I am the last guy that you want trying to fix anything or work on anything that has any tools involved. And so our washing machine breaks, and something inside me broke as well. And it didn't just break. It broke on the very day that my sister and her family who came in from California to stay with us. And they were going to need to do some laundry. And it didn't just break. It broke when it was completely full of water. So now I had that new dynamic to figure out. And it broke, and I broke, and it was tough. And then I read in this devotional, my wife got me this devotional, 40-day reflections. And I read this: healing requires rejecting shame's most potent weapon. Heal requires rejecting shame's most potent weapon: isolation. That means finding someone to share your story with, the whole, unaltered, unedited version, and then finding a community to share your story with. That's where healing begins. It's when we move away from that shame and we move out of isolation and we share that story. And as soon as I closed the book, I sent a text to a friend and said, hey, can I give you a call today? And we set up a time, and I made the call, and I took off the mask, and that's where the healing began. Because real connection leads to real change. And that's not just true for me, that's true for you as well. And those words, sure, they came out of a book, but they might as well have been coming directly from Jesus himself. Shame grows in isolation, but healing comes from vulnerability. Healing comes when we take off the mask and we embrace community. And so my challenge for you, first, take off the mask. And then second, don't settle for the surface. Don't settle for the surface. take your conversations to the next level. Ask people how they're doing, really. And be willing to answer that yourself. How are you doing, really? What's going on today, really? How are things beneath the surface, really? You probably are aware that there are several different levels of communication. Level 1 communication, it's informational, right? It's just the small talk, it's the chit-chat, it's just catching us up on the details. Nothing wrong with that. That's a great place to start, but unfortunately, that's where too many of us stop. Sure, start there with your family, with your friends, even with your neighbors, but then move to the next level. Level 2 communication is emotional. It's where we guys, start to share, how are you feeling? What are you excited about? What are you frustrated by? What are you encouraged by? What brings you joy? What are some challenges that you're facing? And how are you approaching that? And so we move beyond the facts to the feelings. That's a level 2 conversation. And you could have that with most people in your life. You could take the conversation with a neighbor to that next level as you're out walking the dog. You can have that level of conversation. You can practice sharing at that level of conversation because that's where the connection begins. That's where the healing begins. And then with a few people, with the right people, you can move even to level 3 conversations. We move beyond informational and even beyond emotional to relational. It's where we actually, in this moment, start to relate with each other. And I hear how you're feeling, and I share how I'm feeling, and we actually connect, and we find empathy, and we find something that we have in common that we didn't even realize before. And in this moment, we start to go higher and wider and deeper, and we build an experience right now in this conversation that is life-giving to our soul. It's like a breath of fresh air for that isolated, independent soul. So don't settle on the surface. Don't settle on the surface. Take off the mask. Take your conversations to the next level. And then number 3, get a group. Get a group. This is what's going to help those other 2 become normative and become habits in your life. When you get a group, it's so much easier to take off the mask because you're with these same people week after week, right? And you already have taken it off a little bit, and they've accepted and loved you, and now you can take it off some more. When you get a group, you don't settle on the surface. You actually probe a little bit deeper, and you have time to take those conversations a little bit further. When you get a group, you find real connections. When you get a group, you find real change. And so many of you have experienced this. So many of you know this firsthand, because right now, here at Parker Hill, we have 93 groups up and running, alive and well. We have community groups, we have discipleship groups, we have women's groups, we have men's groups, we have groups for young singles, we have groups for adult singles, we have groups to help you with your recovery, we have groups to help you start on your spiritual journey. We even have a group right now to help you love like Jesus. We have groups to help you take your first steps and groups to help you take next steps. And at this moment, 605 people here at Parker Hill are connected to one of those groups. An environment where they can take off the mask and they don't have to settle on the surface. And they can find real connections that lead to real change. And I think it's no stretch to say that it's those groups that have been life-giving to our church, even in a time when everything else has been so crazy. It's those groups that have allowed us as a community of faith to stay alive and well and vibrant. It's your connection in your groups. And if you're one of the folks that is not yet in a group, maybe now's the time. Head to parkerhill.org/groups and find a group that's right for you. That group is the place that will help you make a habit of these good intentions. That's the place where you can take off the mask, where you don't have to settle on the surface, where you can learn what it means to love one another. And let me tell you what you'll find. If you take that step, any of those steps really, when you take that step, when you acknowledge your tendency towards independence, when you realize that real connections are what you need, when you acknowledge that you need to take off the mask, when you realize that you shouldn't just settle on the surface, you're going to experience 3 things. You're going to experience some one another moments. You're going to experience what they experienced in the first century. You're going to experience moments where you are loved by one another, where you are cared for by one another, where you can pray for one another, where you can cheer one another and you can cry with one another. You can support one another and sharpen one another and love one another. You will experience one another moments. You'll also experience you too moments. No, not Bono and the band, although that would be pretty cool. I'm talking about YOUTOO. You too moments. Moments when you realize that someone that you never knew before actually has a lot in common. And the struggles that you're going through, you're not going through alone. C.S. Lewis, the brilliant British author, said it this way: the typical expression of opening friendship would be something like this. What? You too? I thought I was the only one. When we connect with each other, we realize we're not the only one. We don't have to stay in isolation. We don't have to hide in shame, because everybody's going through these struggles. Everyone's living this human experience. We're all in this together, and we're better together. So you'll experience some one another moments. You'll experience some you too moments. And finally, you'll experience some aha moments. The light bulb will finally come on as you connect and talk in community. The fog will lift. The pieces will come together. Things will finally start to make sense. You'll be able to put into practice some of what you know you should be living. You'll experience that. There'll be those aha moments, those defining moments in your life. That's what you'll experience when you take off the mask, when you don't settle on the surface, and when you move to the fact where you're in a group, where you can love and be loved, and we together can live out this command of Jesus to love one another. As I have loved you, so you also must love one another. By this, the whole world will know that you are my disciples, if you move out of independence and isolation and into loving relationships with one another. Now, as I wrap up, Zach's going to come and share a song with us, a song about abundantly more, the abundantly more that Jesus has to offer us. And it's a wonderful song, and I love the message of it. It's been rolling through my mind all day. And I just want to make sure that you don't misunderstand the message of it, because Jesus does invite us into a relationship with him, and he invites us to experience abundantly more. But we don't simply experience that just by being related to him. That would be like saying that Home Depot has everything you need to fix that washer, and then going to Home Depot and just staying there. Yes, they have all we need, but I have to take those tools and I need to put them to work. Jesus has given us all we need, and some of what he's given us are the relationships in our lives. It's the connections and the people around us. It's the opportunities and the courage and the wisdom to make these relational connections. He does offer us abundantly more, and he wants so much more for us than the independence that we're living in. And so as we sing this together, let those words reframe your mind and let them push you toward the more that he has to offer. And that is found, my friends, in community. Before we get to that, I would love to pray with you. So let's pray together now. Jesus, we thank you. We thank you that you have not left us on our own. You have not left us in our independence and our isolation. You came to be with us. You came to love us and to show us how to love others. You came to show us what community looks like and to show us how it can transform our lives. And so I pray that we would follow you down that path. We would take off the masks and let ourselves be known by the people around us. We would take our conversations to the next level, and we would accept others as they do the same. Jesus, I thank you that you haven't left us to just connect with you on our own, but that you've enabled us to connect with each other, to lock our arms and to link our hearts with one another in pursuit of you. It's in your name we pray. Amen.